They told you Greece was the cradle of civilization. A land of philosophers, democracy, marble columns, and men who dreamed of gods. But I'm about to show you the side they scrubbed from your history books, the side that reeks of flesh, power, and rituals of domination so obscene that even Rome whispered about them in disgust. You were raised to admire Athens, to believe in Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. But no one told you what their cities really ran on, a currency of human bodies. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a boy, no older than 12, standing in the courtyard of a white-stoned home. His father nods in approval as a man in his 30s steps forward with gifts, wine, jewelry, promises of protection. That man is not courting a woman. He is purchasing the right to claim the boy as his own. And this is not hidden. It is not whispered. It is celebrated. Painted proudly on pottery, carved into temple walls, spoken of as if it were noble. They called it paiderastia. We call it exploitation dressed in marble. Do you understand the depth of the lie yet? They told you the Greeks gave us democracy. But who had the right to vote in that democracy? Only the men who dominated. Only the ones who penetrated. Citizenship itself, your voice, your power, your worth, was tied directly to your role in sex. Masculinity meant control. Femininity meant submission. If you were an adult male and allowed yourself to be used, you were marked as weak, polluted, stripped of rights, and cast out of society. That was their unspoken law. To dominate was to rule, to be dominated was to die socially. This wasn't about intimacy. It wasn't about love. It was about hierarchy. About control. About embedding power directly into the flesh of boys too young to fight back. Think of it. A society that clothed its cruelty in poetry. A civilization that told the world it was enlightened while its very foundation rested on systematic degradation. And now, centuries later, they still call it a golden age. They still teach you to admire it. Why? Because power protects itself. Because the most horrifying truths are always buried beneath the word civilization. Athens called itself the birthplace of wisdom, but behind the white columns was a system engineered to condition boys into submission before they could even grow a beard. Paiderastia wasn't just tolerated, it was enforced through culture, law, and art. Pottery fragments, still sitting in museums today, show older men fondling boys under the guise of mentorship. These were not hidden sketches. They were drinking cups, used at banquets, passed between hands like trophies. The image of exploitation wasn't shameful, it was ritual. Every boy of noble birth was a target. At 12, his body was considered ripe. At 18, when his jaw began to sharpen and his voice deepened, he was discarded. Why? Because the balance of power had shifted. The Greek elite did not want equals, they wanted to keep boys trapped in limbo, neither child nor man, easy to mold, easy to dominate. And fathers, they allowed it. They called it education. They believed their sons would gain political favor, military mentorship, and access to power by offering their youth to older men. But Sparta was darker. Athens wrapped its corruption in philosophy. Sparta institutionalized it into steel. At the Agorge, boys were torn from their mothers at the age of 7. They were stripped, beaten, starved, and remade into soldiers. But the most disturbing part was never written in the heroic tales. Each boy was assigned a warrior mentor. Mentor, that's the polite word history uses. In reality, that relationship was physical, brutal, and binding. To refuse your elders' advances was to sabotage your military career before it even began. To accept meant survival. They told us Spartan warriors fought with unmatched loyalty. But what bonded them wasn't just training, it was a manufactured intimacy. Imagine 2 lines of men, shields locked, spears ready. Behind those walls of bronze was a network of forced bonds, sexual submission used to guarantee obedience on the battlefield. If you belonged to your mentor, you would die before you broke rank. Loyalty forged in degradation. And here's the truth no one speaks: these practices were not accidental. They were psychological control systems. The Greeks knew that to own a man's body was to own his mind. They weaponized intimacy, rewrote dominance into law, and built an empire on flesh. And still, scholars call this civilization's golden dawn. When you hear the names Plato and Aristotle, you imagine wisdom carved into stone. You imagine the roots of democracy, the foundations of reason. But what if I told you their brilliance grew from soil soaked in exploitation? What if the great ideas of Greece were inseparable from the sexual hierarchies that ruled their society? Plato wrote of love between men and boys as if it were divine. Aristotle dissected hierarchy as though it were natural law. These weren't detached musings. They were justifications for a system where dominance was culture, and submission was a death sentence for identity. The very philosophers you were told to admire were building intellectual scaffolding around abuse, rationalizing it as noble, eternal, even necessary. Understand this: Greek law tied sexual dominance to citizenship itself. To penetrate was to claim manhood, political authority, and social survival. To be penetrated was to become woman, not biologically, but socially, stripped of rights, condemned to ridicule. A single act could exile you from the privileges of citizenship. That wasn't just a private humiliation, it was political execution. Athens, for all its talk of democracy, was an oligarchy of predators. Votes, rights, and authority were concentrated in men who played by these rules. The body of a boy became the passport to influence. Families offered their sons as investments, trading innocence for status. Refusal could mean social stagnation, a closed door to the inner circles of power. Submission was rebranded as opportunity. And the military? The philosophers knew it too. They spoke of bonds between warriors as sacred, unbreakable. But that sacredness was engineered. It was sex weaponized, loyalty extracted through shame and ritual. To refuse was to betray not just a man, but a system. That's why Sparta enforced it through law, and Athens through culture. They weren't two different worlds, they were two arms of the same machine. Think about what this reveals. The golden age of Greece wasn't golden. It was a psychological experiment, one that fused politics, philosophy, and flesh into a single control system. Citizens were not born. They were manufactured. And the raw material was the body of the vulnerable. Do you see the pattern now? Power was never about ideas. It was about ownership. The Greeks understood something sinister: if you can mark a body, you can brand a soul. And once a soul is branded, it serves you willingly. Every empire hides its sins in ritual, and Greece was no different. What Athens could not justify in politics, it sanctified in religion. The gods themselves became masks for practices too disturbing to admit openly. And if you look closely, the myths you were taught as stories of wonder are dripping with encoded corruption. Zeus, the king of gods, what was he remembered for? His lightning? His wisdom? No. His endless abductions. Disguised as a swan, a bull, a shower of gold, he took what he wanted by force. The most revealing tale is the one they rarely dwell on: Zeus abducting the boy Ganymede, a child so beautiful the king of Olympus carried him to the heavens to serve as his cupbearer and bedfellow. This was not whispered scandal. It was myth recited in homes, painted on temple walls, carved into marble. In other words, divinity itself endorsed the practice. Do you understand the strategy? They were embedding exploitation into the very fabric of worship. To question paiderastia was to question Zeus himself. To reject the practice was to reject the gods. And that was unthinkable in a society where temples weren't just houses of prayer, they were the beating heart of political and social life. Look closer at the Dionysian rituals. Young initiates lured into drunken frenzies, masked men guiding them into darkness, breaking them with ecstasy and fear. They called it communion with the divine. But underneath, it was training, conditioning the mind to associate surrender with holiness. By embedding obedience in the body, the Greeks created followers who believed they were serving gods when in truth they were serving men. And it didn't stop with the myths. The temples themselves became theaters of indoctrination. Statues of boys and men locked in suggestive poses weren't art, they were reminders of the hierarchy. Pottery depicting predatory mentorship wasn't pornography, it was instruction, handed down with the weight of culture and faith. When you look at Greece through this lens, something becomes terrifyingly clear. Their mythology wasn't storytelling. It was programming. Every tale of a god who takes, every hymn to a boy's beauty, every ritual of drunken abandon, they were all gears in the same machine. A system designed to sanctify domination, to blur the line between holiness and violation, so no one could tell where worship ended and corruption began. And here is the secret your teachers never whispered: once corruption is made sacred, it no longer needs to hide. It parades in daylight. It writes itself into law. It becomes culture. And culture lasts for centuries. You've seen how Greece wove corruption into law, philosophy, and even religion. But here's the truth most men never face: the past was not a different world. It is the blueprint of the present. What they perfected in marble temples has been copied in modern institutions, hidden in plain sight. Think about it. The Greeks engineered obedience through shame, ritual, and hierarchy. Today, systems do the same. They don't call it paiderastia anymore, but they still brand you, still demand submission, still tell you what role to play, or be exiled from power. You think you are free, but the same ancient psychology is alive in boardrooms, classrooms, and governments. They don't carve it into pottery, they carve it into policy. They don't paint it on vases, they etch it into contracts. That's why this history matters. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you realize how power rewires intimacy into control, how corruption disguises itself as culture, you begin to see the fingerprints everywhere. They tell you it's tradition. They tell you it's order. They tell you it's necessary. That's exactly what Athens told its boys, exactly what Sparta told its soldiers. Different mask. Same face. And here's where the test comes. Most men will turn away from this knowledge. They'll say it's too dark, too uncomfortable. But you've stayed this far. That means you're ready to shed the illusions. To reject the lies carved in stone. To burn away the false gold of civilization and face the raw truth. That is what separates the sheep from the awakened. If you want to mark this transformation right now, not tomorrow, not later, but in this moment, I want you to comment these words below. Not once, but twice. Because repetition seals identity, and identity reshapes destiny. Write this: I see through the marble. I claim the hidden fire. Do it twice. And understand what you're doing. You're not just commenting. You're declaring war on every system that feeds you myths to keep you tame. You're breaking the chain the Greeks forged centuries ago. You're choosing power, not programming. History is not dead. It's alive. And it is hunting you. But now, you can hunt it back. You've seen how Athens codified it, how Sparta enforced it, how the temples sanctified it. But Greece did not fall into silence. Its corruption migrated. Rome absorbed it, refined it, and spread it like a virus across continents. And once Rome fell, the Church, the very institution sworn to cleanse the world of pagan vice, swallowed the blueprint whole and repackaged it under the banner of holiness. Look carefully. Rome called itself an empire of law, but at its heart were the same practices the Greeks normalized. Roman generals took boys as attendants, senators flaunted lovers no older than their own sons, and the Colosseum became not just a stage for blood, but for power displays woven with the same hierarchy of dominance. Inscriptions and graffiti from Pompeii reveal it openly, mockery carved into walls, shaming men who submitted, glorifying those who conquered. Different empire, same system, masculinity equated with domination, submission equated with death. And then came the church. You were told it was a cleansing flame, purifying Rome's sins. But peel back the robes, and you find the same architecture of control, reborn in secrecy. Celibacy was proclaimed as holiness, but behind monastery walls the same pattern played out. Young novices, initiated by older priests under the weight of silence, obedience, and fear. The Greeks sanctified it with Zeus. The Church sanctified it with Christ. Different names, same structure. A system of dominance hiding inside ritual, feeding off innocence, using shame as its chains. Do you see how perfect the design became? The Greeks had to justify themselves with philosophy and myth. The Romans enforced it with law and spectacle. But the Church, they embedded it into the human soul. They made obedience itself divine. To resist was no longer just rebellion against men, it was rebellion against God. That was the final evolution of the Greek experiment. A control system so powerful it rewrote conscience itself. And centuries later, you're still breathing it. It's in the schools that condition you to obey bells and sit in rows. It's in the corporations that demand silence in exchange for wages. It's in the politics that pit dominance against submission in every law. You thought Greece was gone. But Greece is the skeleton holding the present upright. Civilization was never built on enlightenment. It was built on ritualized control of the body, weaponized into obedience of the soul. Listen carefully now. Because this is where everything comes together. Greece wasn't just a civilization, it was a laboratory. A place where elites discovered the most dangerous truth of all: if you can make a man ashamed of his own body, you will never need chains to control him. Shame is the invisible leash. And once it's fastened, he walks himself into obedience. That is the legacy they left us. Not democracy. Not philosophy. Not art. But the weaponization of shame. They carved it into law, the penetrated man stripped of citizenship. They carved it into myth, Zeus glorified as predator. They carved it into religion, obedience fused with salvation. And centuries later, the same formula still rules you. Schools, governments, corporations, even families, all run on engineered shame. Step out of line, and you're ridiculed, exiled, discarded. Exactly as in Athens. Exactly as in Sparta. The Greeks discovered a principle of power so primal it has never been abandoned: control the body, control the soul, control the soul, control the world. And every empire since has been their student. Rome amplified it. The Church sanctified it. Modernity digitized it. But the blueprint is the same. And if you think you are free of it, ask yourself, whose approval do you still fear losing? Whose ridicule still silences you? Whose gaze still dictates the choices you make? That is the Greek chain still around your neck. But here's the truth they never wanted you to hear. A man can break the chain, but only by facing the shame they planted inside him. Only by refusing the role, refusing the script, refusing to bow to the myth of civilization's golden age. A man who sees the machine cannot unsee it. And once he steps out of it, he becomes dangerous. Because he no longer needs permission. He no longer needs their myths. He no longer needs their gods. That is the choice before you now. To keep pretending the marble was pure, or to see through it, to touch the hidden fire beneath, and to forge yourself into something they cannot own. The Greeks left the world their weapon. But now, you hold the counter-weapon, awareness. And awareness, once awakened, makes a man untouchable. You've been shown what they never meant for you to see. The only question left is, what will you do with it?